In today's episode, we sit down with Brandon Muir. Brandon is a friend of mine from my school days, and in today's episode, we cover some important topics such as managing expectations, taking responsibility for your life, and even suicide. If you are someone who feels like you need a little bit of control in your life and you need to start taking a bit more action, this episode is for you. Tell me about a time in your life that was difficult for you.
Yeah, there's quite a few. If I look back, I would like to maybe go back into my youth. Um, Actually, let's take it further back. It paints a nice narrative. Um, so I went through a period of my life where I was young and I lost my father at a very young age. I was around 8 years old when he passed, and it was by suicide, and it wasn't a pretty suicide. Um, And later down my life, the narrative built on that, where I lost an uncle to suicide. My mom lost her own mom to suicide. So that whole trend in the family, with, mental problems, depression, suicide's a big aspect within, the life I grew up with.
And how did that shape your view on the world from quite a young age?
Mike, if I look at it, people always ask me the question, would you ever change, having your father back? And it's a funny question because, my answer always shocks people and I say I would never change it. Um, I don't think I would have become the man I am today if he was around. Um, I think losing him at a young age, I had to take on a lot of responsibility. Um, I had an absent mother, and growing up in these sort of situations, I had to take a lot of responsibility, which was, if I look at it now, both a gift and a weight. So, you know, I never blamed my mom for being an absent parent, and the reason I say that is because now that I'm older, and you look back and you say, what she had to go through to provide for her two children, for me and my brother. And, being a single parent in this day and age, having to provide for two, children by themselves, and what my father had left in damages was, when I sit now, I never blamed her, and it taught me to take on every responsibility and to be accountable for everything.
That must have been really difficult at the age of 8.
It was funny because it happened literally after New Year's. So, imagine being so young, you know, at that stage, but maybe in New Year, it's not really big in your life, but you're going into the new year and you've lost a parent. And I still remember like vividly that I went to school that Monday and I was in grade 3, and I still, I couldn't comprehend what had happened, that I'd actually lost my father. And I still said to the teacher at that time, I still said, oh yeah, my dad passed away over the weekend. It's, at that young age, I couldn't comprehend it. And immediately the school had contacted my mother, and, we're in alarm mode because, this kid is just obviously in the front of the entire class, just said like, he's just lost his parent. Like, what is he doing here? Kind of thing. So,
Jeez, that must have been like so weird because yeah, you almost haven't had time to process what you've been through.
yeah.
How did you how did you almost start to heal from that? And what age was it that you were like that it started making sense to you?
I think that's a tough one, because I still remember when I must have been around 12, 13 years old, and my mom had brought home a new boyfriend. So a couple of years had passed, and I never quite understood. Like, yeah, yes, my dad wasn't there anymore, but I never understood. Okay, but why is my mom with someone else? Like, you're not my dad. Like, why are you here? And that slowly started to settle in. At that age, I look at it now and I'm like, I feel sorry for my mom because right now she doesn't have a lifetime partner. She had one boyfriend after my father, but didn't work out, and she's been single ever since. And it's all about perspective to me. So, like I mentioned to you, would I change it for the world? I wouldn't. Um, yeah, and it's just I still look back now and I still comprehend it because I look at people who suffer from depression. I look at people who have lost their parents at an older age, and to me, I think it was easier for me to have lost my father at a younger age because I didn't know him really. What did I know at 8 years old? There's some people that lose their parents when they're 18, when they're 25, when they're older. You've gotten to know them your entire life, and then you suffer that loss. And I think that is where it gets difficult for a lot of people.
Once you had realized what the severity of the situation was, and you kind of grew older and you started to understand it, how did you cope with that?
Yeah, so I like to link a lot of the childhood trauma to attachment styles. Um, and where people tend to fit. So I'm in an avoidance. So you get an avoidance, an anxious person, and a secure person. And those are your attachment styles that are linked to a childhood trauma. Um, and the way that I cope with things, well, cope with the situation was like I isolated myself completely. Like for many years of my life, I was self-sufficient. I was a person that didn't need anyone. I never relied on any single person. I liked being alone. It's was my way of coping with things, and it was kind of a blessing and a curse because at the end of the day, it impacted a lot of relationships that I've had because I'm like, well, I don't need you. I'm self-sufficient. I can go sit in my room and not have any friends. There's no problem, and I don't have a problem with that. So my coping mechanism was just complete isolation.
It seems like men in particular are more prone to suicide.
I love that.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's a brilliant thing that you've brought up, and in my opinion, I want to kind of link it to responsibility. Um, I think in this day and age, there's a lack of responsibility in men. I think where the world has moved to, I think men have lost their sense of purpose. I look to the outcomes leading up to my dad's suicide and how my mom had explained it as I was older. And, eventually when I had the discussions with her when I was at the right age. And, at that stage, he had lost his job. There was issues in the marriage. There was a lot of financial issues. There was gambling issues. A lot of things led up to that moment that he couldn't live anymore. Well, he deemed himself he could not live in this life anymore. And that's where it upsets me because, you have children who were young. I was 8 years old. My brother was 3 years old. And where was your responsibility that, yes, things are tough, but you just leave us? I look at the responsibility my mom took on. I look at, she could have done the same thing. I mean, look at the life that she had. I mean, I don't know if I told you, but when she grew up, it was actually funny enough, she was 20 and her own mother shot her and then took her own life in front of her. And, my mom never gave up on me and my brother. It was her purpose. She had a hand to play. Does she just exit this life or does she have to turn to provide for these two boys? Who's going to look after them? And I think that's where, the lack of purpose in men and the lack of responsibility leads to these type of things.
Do you think we also maybe need to speak more as men? Because I've got close mates that they come to me out of the group, and it looks like they're doing super well.
Yeah.
They look like the happiest person in the world, and nothing, they don't look anxious. They don't look like anything could really knock them over. And it's often those people that are actually struggling the most because they find it so difficult to chat to someone, and once in a while they might come up to me, or someone within our friend group who's like a safe space to them. But often they don't, and they go through a really hard time, and they only tell you months down the line.
I think, that's where, men, I think, make the mistake, is that, they feel so embarrassed that they can't speak about it because there's an expectation of who they're supposed to be. And we'll later chat onto it a little bit about, expectations and stuff. And that's like the pressure that you put on yourself. There's no shame in speaking to anyone. I look in my own situation. I look at a person where I'm quite reserved. I carry it on my shoulder. I don't like to burden anyone else with my problems. There's like a handful of people that know the story about me, who know the true person that I am. They see me from whatever perspective they see me. They don't understand the trauma that I've gone through. And I'm to blame because I never spoke about it up until this point. And and that's when you invited me onto the podcast. I thought, it's a perfect time because, in my life now, I'm 29 years old and I got a really good understanding of who I am. And yeah, my best advice is, like, if you're going through something, you need to have someone there for you. You mustn't be afraid to speak to your friends. People, it's like, you take it a step back. Let's understand, in my father's case, I don't know what he was really going through. Yes, we knew the external factors, but I don't know no one knew what was going through his head. He was literally fine the day before, perfectly fine. And the next day he was gone. And the scary thing out of that is my mom didn't see the rapid change that this was going to happen. The only thing that she felt weird was on that particular night is he went to my brother's room and my room late in the evening and spent a lot of time in both our rooms, which he had never done before. And she thought that was a little bit weird, but didn't think anything of it until, he obviously had committed suicide, and she realized that he was saying goodbye and it was too late. But there was no signs. And I actually get like goosebumps because it actually makes me like, she blames herself sometimes, because, she didn't see the signs. But how do you see a sign like that? How do you, as a human being, know that's going to happen when he was perfectly fine?
Did your dad ever speak to you about anything that he was going through? Any problems that he was having?
Oh, I think, it's hard to think that. I think this very, how'd I think back to when I was 8 years old, he could have said something, but, as a kid, it wouldn't have really sunk, or there's a lack of understanding. The only thing I remember from him was, him like watching TV, and let me also like say he was a very good dad up until that point, but definitely he didn't speak to me. No.
And you speak about taking responsibility. I know that you and I have spoken about this off camera. And I think a lot of people, and you can't compare traumas at the end of the day, but I think a lot of people have significant trauma in their life, and they go through some really horrible things that you wouldn't wish on anyone. But at the same time, there's a point where we all gonna die as well. So we've also got to process that trauma and try to heal, try to get better. How did you try to heal?
So a lot of my friends know me like I enjoy the game of poker, and the reason why I enjoy it is because it goes deeper. I think in life you get dealt a hand, and how you play the hand is how the outcome comes. I mean, if you get an ace and I've got a 2-7, but I play the hand better than you, I might win. But you've got the better hand. I think in my case, I used the pain I used the trauma, I used everything that I had to go through to feel the person that I am today. So I'm a very resilient person, something I've learned from my mom. Um, I'm a person that is very, very much understanding, very driven, ambitious. But in that same breath, I want to take it a step back and say, I've learned so much about myself. I think what makes me a little bit unique is that I really, really understand myself. And the fact that I understand myself, I understand other people a lot better. So a lot of people actually come to speak to me about certain things when they're going through troubles, or they come for advice. And I mean, we actually had a conversation where you thought I wasn't like empathetic. Where you thought I was empathetic, sorry.
Yes.
I thought I wasn't empathetic.
I was very confused. So just to put a bit of a background story. So we went for coffee about 2 weeks before today, and we kind of just discussed a little bit of like what we had been going through. And Brandon said that he wasn't empathetic. He'd never been empathetic. And then as he started explaining things, he was telling a story as if he was someone else. And I was like, how can you say that you're not empathetic when you literally, the definition of empathy, putting yourself in someone else's shoes? And I think empathetic people are, especially when we speak about men, it's like empathy is overlooked so often, because as a man you're supposed to be like super strong and confident and whatever, and sometimes being empathetic and just being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes is actually something that makes the quality of a good person or a good man.
Yeah. And yeah, just carrying on with, the putting yourself in someone's position, and tying it back to kind of, my childhood. So my mom, unfortunately, like I said to you, she had to work for me and my brother. She had to put us through school, carry the debt that my father had left. One of the external factors as well, had left a lot of debt with the family. So with all the things that were happening and having to deal with all of this, there was a lot of debt that was left. And who picks up that tab? My mom picked it up. And then on top of the financial, pressures of trying to raise 2 children with no money, and she had to work, was a challenge on its own. And, at this age, when I was growing up, I always blamed her. She was never at my sporting games. She couldn't even pick me up from school. Every day I had to hustle away to get home. I had to beg one of my friends to take me home. Like, I'm taking every single day. Being given these responsibilities that a child shouldn't actually be given. It's what the parents are there for. And I used to like hate her at when I was younger. Like, why are you not there? But when I look at it now, I realize the sacrifices she had to make to provide the life for us and give us the opportunities that she could give. And that's linking it back to being empathetic, is like putting yourself in that position to understand the person through what they went through. Imagine you were in that position. What decisions would you have made? What would your outcome be? Would you have managed it differently? You don't know. The best you can do is put yourself in their position and try understand, so that's with maybe I am empathetic.
I think that's sort of what we're lacking a little bit in our society. Everyone's got their own agenda, everyone's got their own way of doing things. Sometimes we just and everyone judges everyone. I know it's obviously a blanket statement, me saying everyone and everyone, but a lot of people really do, they're super judgmental. And if they just took 1 second to try think as if they were living in that person's shoes.
Yeah. It's crazy that you say that, because what I've noticed, I like to take it a step back and let someone else ask the question. And what I mean by that is, the first thing that people tend to ask, what do you think it is? If you're getting to know someone or you've just met someone, what do? You're immediately trying to place people in society. What do? It's like you just immediately tearing them. I'm better than you, or I've understood that you better than me. It's never just a conversation. And as soon as someone has a conversation like that with me, I walk away from it. I immediately walk away from the conversation. because you're trying to tear me into society and you don't even know who I am. And it's funny because a lot of my friends, they like always say like, why are you such a dad? Stop being such a dad, And a lot of people who aren't my friends say the same thing. And I often like smile and I told you the same thing. It's like, if only you knew, why I'm like this. I don't have children of my own, but I act like a father all the time. I'm always like policing things. I'm always trying to be responsible. I'm always like I'm always the one looking at the risks, and I'm like, because I had to do it at such a young age. I had to be the man of the house at a very young age. I took that upon myself. I look back now, I don't even think it was a decision. I just took it upon myself to be the man of the house. And wow, I mean, I look at my life now and it's helped me. And that's why I said to you, it was more of a gift than a curse in my case.
Yeah, well, I think it's every dark situation does have a positive.
Yeah.
It's so strange because a lot of people that you speak to, you ask them about a really dark point in their life or trauma. And sure, they might not want to relive that trauma. And some cases will be exceptions. But most of the time, they don't want the trauma, but they want that lesson. They learn something so valuable that they wouldn't have learned without that thing happening. If you're someone like me who cares about personal development, purpose, and positivity, then Coffee Charge Conversations is the podcast for you. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button. And let's make the world a better place, one conversation at a time.
Life is so complex, Mike. It is so complex. And, there's so many factors that we have to navigate, whether it is, when you're growing up, when it's your school, when it's university, whether it's the corporate world, you're starting your own business, managing, friends, family, managing societal pressures. There's so much complexity around what we have to go through. And, it's like, I'll never, like, when someone's older than me, I never like to discard that. Like with our parents, you're like, oh, what do you know? When you in your adolescence and you're thinking, oh, what do they know? There comes a point in your time, I think when you're 25, where your frontal lobe develops quite aggressively and you start realizing, your parents were right, I tap into my mom now, into her wisdom. I mean, she's 30 years older than me. Imagine what we go through in a single year or a month, for instance, what experiences we gather and, how we apply that. Now someone's 30 years older than you or 10 years older than you. They've lived more life than you. They've got more experience than you. It's like someone in a job, They've got more experience than you. It's worth just listening sometimes.
You spoke about expectations earlier, and I think that also ties in quite nicely because you say that life is complex, and I think it's complex because we set these standards and we set these societal norms, and there's almost like an age that you've got to achieve certain things, and if you don't achieve it, then you feel like you're failing at life.
Yeah, I love that because I was a person who thought, and people are going to laugh when I say this, but I'm honestly going to say this, I thought I'd be a multimillionaire by 30. I honestly thought I'd be a multimillionaire by 30, and where I sit now, I'm 29, and that's not the case. But I'm honest with you, I've done well for myself. I got a very good job, but I'm not a multimillionaire where I thought I would be, But I don't know if you ever read the book The Alchemist.
I haven't.
Do yourself a favor and read the book. And I encourage people out there to read it as well. Because, often in life, we literally search our entire lives for something that was right in front of us. And that's the message of the book. It goes into more details, but we search our entire life for something that was right in front of us. And what I mean by that is, like, we often think that success and money is one thing, and you're only successful because you have money. And later on in life, you realize that there was a last thing that benchmarked success, And I look at myself now, and I'm the happiest I've ever been, not because I'm rich and not because I'm a multimillionaire, but I look at, I've got a good family, I've got good friends. I've got a good job. I've got a loving girlfriend. Like there's so much of my life that I'm rich in, but you have to realize that, you got to take a step back and say, what makes me successful? Is it the guy who's got million dollars and he doesn't have a family, he doesn't have children, he doesn't have a support system? Who's more rich?
He goes home in his Ferrari every day.
Exactly.
To a lonely big house.
Exactly. And everyone thinks that he's so rich. But I'm talking from a soul perspective. I'm more rich than that guy. It's just where society benchmarks you at the end of the day.
So what does success mean to you?
I think what success means to me is, it's freedom. It's, I work in a job that's at least, it's a high corporate level job. So I manage a big brand within South Africa. It's a big global brand. But what success means to me is that I'm happy. I'm happy with every aspect of my life. And, I've also come to the realization that, with all these pressures around us, I don't have to give 100% every day. Whether I give 20% every day, I show up 30%. One day is 100%. Every day it's unrealistic. You got to be real with yourself. There's no person in the world that is waking up at 4 o'clock. He's gymming, getting all his meals in. He's doing an ice bath. He is managing a girlfriend. He's doing the household chores. He's making good money every single day. It is not realistic, and you got to be real with yourself.
That's where I think empathy comes in the most.
Yeah,
because I still get stuck into the trap of thinking of success in that way. I do. And sometimes I'll look at someone who's making absolute racks.
Yeah.
Like a CEO. But he's probably getting a lawsuit on his desk that day that, he could be in jail for the rest of his life because he made some mistake and all the legal stuff goes towards him. Like, he's got stresses that I can't even comprehend.
Yeah.
Like people think, oh, I'd like to be the president. But if you were actually the president, can you imagine how stressed you would be? You wouldn't have time for family. Yes, you would have all this money. You would be able to make important decisions, but life would be very, very stressful.
Yeah.
Like, people want fame. And then when it comes, they're like you say, it's like they work their whole life to get there just to figure out it wasn't what they really wanted.
Yeah. And, I was actually having a conversation with a colleague of mine who's very high up in the organization. And, when he reached that level of becoming the managing director, so in this company, the managing director is pretty much like the CEO kind of thing. And it wasn't what he expected. He hates it. He wishes he never worked his way into this position. And it's because you put this expectation out there, what you expect it to be, and it never unfolds the way you think it will. And we speak about like managing expectations, and I think let's take it down to a personal level. Managing expectations happen everywhere, whether it's in the corporate environment, whether it's managing your own expectations, and whether it's managing other people's expectations. And like where people get like friendships and family wrong is there's an expectation. I show up the way I do, I expect you to show up the same way. And immediately we need to pause there, because that's never going to happen. You're already setting yourself up for failure, because people aren't going to be the same as you. And, having this expectation in the work environment, for instance, I worked hard, I expect a promotion. You always need to leave a little bit of space in your heart for disappointment at the end of the day.
And the grass is always greener on the other side.
So they say.
Like you say with your mate who he wanted this other thing, got it, and then he's like, this isn't.
He actually wants his old life. He wants his old life back, because his old life he had more time with the family. you often chase, and I love that story. It's like the guy who's walking wants to be the guy on the bicycle, and the guy on the bicycle wants the car, and the guy on the car wants a better car. You always and it links back to the book again. Like you're always chasing something, and you don't realize how rich you are. And I think what helps me a lot is I always like when I'm going through a tough time, I like to write a simple list down of everything I'm grateful for, because it's so easy to zone into the negative of things. And it was a funny story because my girlfriend, for instance, was going through a really tough time at work. But she just focused her whole life on just the work. And I kept telling her, but this is 5% of your life. Look at all the good that is happening, and all your brain can do is focus on that one bad thing, and that's 5% of your life. You need to rewire your brain to say, okay, but what is going well for me? And I like to link this to, how you manage stress and how you manage problems. With my childhood trauma that I kind of grew up with, I believe that helped me, tackle every problem that comes my way. And like, people who know me I don't stress. I really do not stress. Stress is a psychological factor. Did you know that? It's something we create. It's how we address a problem. How many times, and I'll ask you the question, how many times have you been in a situation, something's landed on your table, it wasn't the lawsuit, but in your life, something landed on your table, and immediately you've made it to the worst outcome possible? How on earth am I going to get past this?
Often I just think worst case scenario, and I have to almost train my brain to stop thinking like that. I used to, for example, even with podcast episodes, going into it, I was like, okay, I'm going to mess up. There's going to be awkward silences. This is going to go wrong. Da 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 da. And like that was literally my mindset going into something I loved. And it's like, you can't do that with everything in your life. Like, you've got to start looking at the positive. And as soon as I started doing that and actually realizing that I don't control as much as I think I do,
and I love it.
It got a lot easier.
I love your thing, control. 90% of the problems are in your own head. And, it's like a simple analogy. You're driving to get to work. The traffic robots are out on Winnie Mandela. Everyone knows the issue here. Are you going to change that outcome? You're not going to. So why do you work yourself up? Because you cannot control that. And, like you said, with how many times you've been in a stressful situation, you've come to overcoming that situation and you realized, oh, okay, that wasn't bad. It wasn't bad. I got through it.
Exactly.
And that's the beauty of life, is if you can start learning. People often say to me, they're like, okay, but when does it end? And I'm like, it never ends. You just become better at managing the problem. It will never end. You need to understand that your whole life, the problem actually becomes bigger. When you sit maybe in that one day at the CEO level, you're dealing with a lawsuit, a massive problem. But as you grow older, your problems become bigger. But you learn and you need to adapt to managing those problems. And I think that's where it benefited me in my life, is like when I'm given a problem, immediately I'm like, okay, well, how am I going to fix it? And that's why I don't stress. I'm like, okay, how am I going to fix this? I know I'm going to overcome it. I might not know how I'm going to overcome it, but I'm going to.
So what I did for a long period in my life, and like I say, I've overcome this, and I still battle with it, but I'm overcoming it with therapy, with talking to people and stuff like that, is I used to think that if you focused on the worst case scenario, it can only get better, because you're setting the bar so low that you can't be disappointed.
Yeah.
And that's the way that I used to go into almost everything. And then it would go well, and I'd find I actually still wasn't happy.
Yeah.
I was relieved that it didn't go as badly as I thought it would, but I still wasn't happy. And then as soon as I went in with, this could go great, the interactions that I had went way better. Just everything in that situation started going better. It's like almost manifesting things. When
Yeah.
you manifest something to go horribly,
It will.
it usually does.
Exactly.
And when you go in with a different attitude, the whole outcome is different.
Yeah. I think, you know, like one piece of advice I can give people is like, we as humans and people are in no way perfect, but by any means. But you'll find in life that friendship and love, like yeah, friendship and love begin when you forgive imperfections. So that's something I want to just leave you to think with.
You did something stressful today. You did your first ice bath.
Wow.
How was
You
that
gave me Mike, you gave me
experience?
the experience again. I've got goosebumps. Wow. I mean, Mike, the day that it is, it's freezing outside. It's cloudy. It's cold. I think it was when I got into the car this morning to get here early. It was like 12 degrees, and I'm thinking, now I'm gonna hop into an ice bath. You know, I've worked myself up. I'm like, I've never done this before. I've seen my friends do it. They say it's terrible. It's hard. You know, it's hard. But you know, I am so like fixated on like the brain and how you can control it, you know, and how you can rewire your own brain. It's like if you can master yourself, there's so much that you can accomplish. And like I said, it was my first time doing this, and I mean, I don't know, I did pretty well. I think it was
12 minutes.
yeah, 12 minutes.
Second on the leaderboard, yeah.
And I think it was just a mental game. I think, you know, a lot of people that know me, I've got a good head on my shoulders, as they would say. And that's the same thing I apply to the ice bath. I'm like, okay, let's do the best you can, you know, focus on X, Y, and Z, and you will get through this.
And I've never seen you that quiet before either. You know, you say that you don't stress. I think today was the first time that I saw you stress.
That's touche. Yeah, I was very quiet, and I was dreading it. I'm still cold now.
But what you did is you tackled a problem that you had no idea what it would be like, and you went in completely blind, and you did it anyways. And like you say, that's kind of taking ownership of your life, taking responsibility, doing stuff that might be hard or that you don't want to do, but not just focusing on this is going to suck, because then it will.
Exactly. You know, I thought exactly with the podcast, I'm like, the worst part leading up to this was the ice bath. I got over this and everything's smooth sailing now. And I like what you said there because, you know, like I've never experienced that problem and I didn't know how I was going to navigate it, but I did it. And I like to like, you know, given another example, like where I took on a recent new role, which is quite a high level corporate role. And it's been my first month. And, you know, people always say like, oh, you do so well. You just know what to do all the time. It's like, I tell people I have no idea what I'm doing. You guys don't understand. I have no idea what I'm doing. It just looks like I know what I'm doing because I'm just trying to navigate this. I'm trying to figure it out. But to them, it looks like I know what I'm doing. But I'm being honest with myself and I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I didn't even know I should have taken this role. It's way ahead of where I should actually be, you know? But it's
a relief.
It is a relief.
It's a relief when you look at other people in a weird way and you know that they struggle through life as well. If it was like the movies where everyone else was just smooth sailing, life was easy for them and you were the only one struggling, I think life would be a lot harder. But I've found it to be a relief that one, no one knows what they're doing, and two, no one really cares about you.
It's such a good point because again comes back to how you view things. You think people care, they don't care. They really do not care. And you think they do, and people don't. They've got their own problems to deal with. They have their own life to navigate. And now you think they care about you? No, I don't think so.
Do you think people almost use their problems as a way, and obviously it's a blanket statement, but do you think the majority of people use their problems as a way, as a form of identity?
I think so. I think so. So let's look at it in two ways. So I briefly spoke about your attachment styles, and that was whether you a secure person. So a secure person is someone that had a caregiver. So a caregiver, whether it was a parent or a caregiver or your grandparents, who were there for you, right? And that's secure. An avoidance, who is where I fit into, is someone that wasn't there. Your caregiver wasn't there for you. And then you get an anxious person where it was inconsistent. So the caregiver was there for you and wasn't there for you. So it's created this, uncertainty, the inconsistency. And you'll find that, and that's is a psychological thing that takes place. And then it's interesting to see how these three combinations fit together. So an avoidant pairs well with an anxious person. Majority of the population fits into the anxious space. And, in my relationship, I'm an avoidant, my girlfriend's an anxious, and we pair quite well together. But then you strive to be the secure. So the secure is one who's good at communication. They're good at, they don't, there's no issues with them. You strive to be that type of person. And, in your case, you spoke, and that's from the psychological point of view, the identity that people use with their problems. I think people like sometimes using their problems to identify themselves or to have people feel sorry for them. I think sometimes those same people can play the blame game. Blame their life on issues they've gone through, and it's very easy to do that. But it's hard because in my case, like I said, I was a little bit unique where I could use my problems to my advantage and I let it fuel me. But there are people out there that have serious problems and they don't know how to navigate it, and it's easier for them to play the blame game, because they might not necessarily know how to navigate this, and that's where they find the comfort.
It's like that internal and external locus of control.
Oh, love that. Yeah.
And often you'll find the most miserable people only have the external locus of control. Everything else is their fault. There's war going on. It's like, oh, that's the reason. It's the world is so messed up. It's the CEO hasn't given them a raise. It's the CEO's fault.
Yeah.
It's always someone else outside of them. And I think turning that into an internal locus of control, it's terrifying when it's you who has to now deal with the responsibility, and you look inward and you go, okay, this might be the situation, but I'm the one to blame.
Yeah.
Like, I think in terms of a job, a lot of people think that they're almost owed a job. Like, it's their right to be in that position. That company could hire someone else, and I think it's what you choose to focus on. Are you going to be grateful that you've got a job? Or are you going to, and work harder yourself so that you can get yourself into that promotion? Or are you just going to expect that, I'm going to get the promotion?
So I want to just leave you with my favorite quote in life. And a lot of people won't know this quote. It's just like, it's not what you deserve in life, it's what you negotiate. Everything in life that you have is a negotiation. If you think about it, the guy who sold his company, he negotiated that. The guy who struck a deal, they negotiated that. Everything in life is structured around how you view yourself and how you can negotiate with another person. And, people often look at me and like, oh, well, I deserve your position. Like I want that position. But they don't look at what it took where I was in the beginning, where I sold printers as my first job. I mean, I sold printers. It was probably one of the worst jobs I could ever. I wouldn't wish it upon my worst enemy. They don't look at how far you've come to get what you've earned. And there's times where people just get given something like that. And I think in today's time, there's like this expectation of, well, I deserve it. This life owes you nothing. And that's the sad reality. If you think this world owes you, this little person in this entire universe owes you something, you're viewing things incorrectly, I think.
That's a good way to end it off. Thanks, Brandon. Thanks for today. Thanks for sharing your story, for being brave enough to share your story, for being vulnerable. And yeah, I've always just enjoyed the chats that we've
Yeah.
had. I think you're a really down to earth human being, very genuine, authentic, and I think you're gonna help a lot of people through sharing your story today.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I mean, it's the first time I've ever done something like this. I just hope, people can take something from this. There's so many problems out there, and I just hope I left a message. Like you will get through it. And if you don't think you're gonna get through it, like suicide and all of this is not the option. I promise you, life does get better. You might not see it, but it will get better, and you will overcome it. And don't be afraid to speak to people. If you've got a support structure, if you go see a psychologist, there's no shame in doing things like that. This world is a tough place, and it's not for the faint-hearted. You need these type of tools to navigate it.